Great morning, world. Great morning, friends. This is your boy, Dr. JC Dornick, and we are live. And now we're live on Instagram as well. So great morning, my friends. Welcome to another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC Dornick podcast, but we're going to do things differently today just because it's scary to do things differently. I've been very, very much involved with the science and everything attached to change. So I'm kind of having fun every now and then, and I highly recommend this. Just throwing yourself into things without needing to know everything. I find that the real good stuff comes out when you're not scripted, when you haven't planned too much, where you kind of know what you're going to talk about. Today, we're going to talk about making sense of validation, but rather than giving you the whole podcast episode, I will do that at another time and give you all the details. Today, what I'm going to do for this live edition is do it off the cuff and just give you my thoughts and my feelings about this topic of validation, which is a massive, massive shift. So I want to welcome everybody. And once again, this is Dr. JC, host of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, which is where this full episode will live. And this is our live Monday edition. So we hope that you'll subscribe and support our Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. Check out our free Substack. And also this is being broadcasted on many live channels, including our Instagram at Dr. JC Dornick. And you're going to love this. So being that this is not the podcast episode, I don't have to tell you about all of our sponsors and everything like that. We can just get started here. And because this is live, streaming on all these different platforms, which is another scary thing to consider, you guys can ask questions and you can check in. And this platform that I have should show anyone's questions or check-ins in this this feed that I have. So if anybody along the way wants to make a comment, ask a question, or yell at me, all things are accepted here. It's live. It's the Wild West. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make sense of validation. And I will give you the beginning of what I wrote in the podcast episode. But what we're going to do is we're going to also reference this amazing book right here by Carolyn Fleck, who I really, really am excited to have on the podcast soon. And it's just a book that I just synchronistically found through another author. And this is what I call a book trail. And that when my book comes out, you'll learn a lot more about that stuff. It's that idea of when you read a book and you find an author that you like, you get attached and connected to other books and other authors. So I found this one through the amazing Adam Grant. You guys heard me do a book review on his book, Think Again, and he just talked about this book. And when I read this book, not only was it delicious, but it just brought this topic up that is just so relevant in all of our lives, but also especially relevant in my life, in my study of human behavior and the idea of becoming a better communicator. It also helped me unveil a weakness. And I don't know how this sits with you, but I have definitely identified over the years, and this is the win, is to consciously identify that you lack in the ability to let people feel validated when they're talking. You know, we talk a lot about conscious and unconscious behavior. And we also have this desire inside of us. We very often talk about this desire to be right and be validated yourself. And it's an interesting interplay in the framework of a conversation, because if you're someone, like I spent most of my life, that really seeks to be right versus kind, right? What you'll do is you'll talk more than you'll listen. You'll listen just to talk. And we have all these skill sets and tools like motivational interviewing and active listening. And all of a sudden you realize, am I using those tools to just get what I want? Or am I using those tools as they were created and intended for to let the person that is talking while you're listening feel heard rather than just using the material of their conversation for your own personal gain? Now, I'm not saying one thing is worse than the other, but are you conscious of that process going on? That's what this conversation is about. And I did a real deep dive into the book and some research, and that's what the podcast episode will be about. So if you're not already subscribed, check out the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast, sponsored in large part by the Make Sense Academy. And that's our private psychological safe haven and community where we have live masterminds and we do work and we learn the interface response system. And I provide every headspace tool and business growing tool and communication tool that I've ever created or benefited from. It's all in there under one roof for less than a month than it would probably cost you to buy some stuff you don't need today. Okay. So let me just give you a little bit of a synopsis on the podcast episode, and then we're going to free flow based on some of the highlights and takeaways. So validation is a groundbreaking yet often misunderstood communication tool that we either have running on autopilot. So some of you have validation running on autopilot. I notice that certain people really make me feel heard when I'm talking. And I don't even know if they're doing that intentionally or if it's just running on autopilot. So some of you have it running on autopilot, but once armed with awareness, it redefines how we interact with ourselves and others by highlighting one of human connection's most overlooked yet vital elements. And this is in the framework of a connection. One of the most overlooked yet vital elements is the need to feel seen, heard, and understood. Think about what that means for you right now, selfishly for yourself, when you are sharing something, kind of like I'm doing right now, right? How could my audience, the live audience, validate me right now? They would be saying things, and I'm not prompting you to do this, I'm just giving you an example. They would be saying things in the comments like, yeah, I totally get that. Oh man, that's so powerful what you just said. And then take it even a step further by saying things that prove that you heard, by saying, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that. So if you have this desire to become a master communicator, the practice is called active listening, but the end result is that the person that is speaking feels validated. And when you make somebody feel validated, oh boy, is that a game changer, massive game changer. So the need to feel seen, heard, and understood. So the author of this amazing book, PhD Carolyn Fleck, she's a psychologist and expert in emotional intelligence. She walks readers through this process. And that's what's so great about her book. You can listen to it on Audible as well. And it's actually her reading it. But she walks readers through the science, psychology, and practical application of this thing called validation, not as a tool for agreement. This is an interesting component of validation. If I validate you, kind of like forgiveness, in the podcast episode, I draw an analogy or a connection between validation and forgiveness, right? One of the reasons we struggle with forgiveness is that if I forgive you, it's my way of just admitting defeat and telling you like, hey, what you did, I'm okay with it. That's not what forgiveness is, right? Forgiveness doesn't mean that you agree with something or say that it's okay. Forgiveness means that you're forgiving them to the sense that you're not allowing it to impact you anymore. So what's interesting about validation is if I validate you, it doesn't require that I agree with you, right? It's just a way of me saying that I understand, right? It's a strategy for connection and emotional regulation. Such an interesting interplay. And if you can master this, and here's one of the catches that you'll get from the book, it cannot be done inauthentically. You can't fake validation because there's an energy exchange in that space, in the framework of a communication, right? People can tell if you really, really, truly understand them, and just put it into play and practice it. Don't be afraid to fail, right? You're going to fail your way through everything. So, at its core, validation teaches us that people don't need to be right. So, if I'm speaking, I don't need you to say you're right. They just need to be real, right? That's it. People just want to feel that they exist, and they want to be heard and understood. So, and for that, they need a space safe enough to let their truth breathe out. So I love that. And just quickly about this author, because I'm just in love with this book. I'm going to recommend this to everyone. I'm putting this when my book comes out, and I'm hoping to sign on with a publisher this week. Very exciting. When my book comes out, it's going to come with an accompanying what I call book trail. And that's every book that I read that ever influenced anything that I wrote in the book. And I just read this book last week, and I've decided it's so powerful that I'm going to put it in my book. I'm going to caption something I took away from it and insert it somewhere in my book. And her book's going to go on the book trail. So if you ever see this video, Carolyn, I loved it. So Carolyn Fleck is a licensed psychologist and executive coach with a clinical psychology and organizational behavioral background. She specializes in helping people improve their emotional intelligence and interpersonal effectiveness. Ooh, I love that. How's your interpersonal effectiveness? That's another way of saying, like, what happens to people when they leave a conversation with you? Do they feel heard? Do they want to do it again? Or they're like, I'm not doing that again. Your interpersonal effectiveness, particularly in high stakes professional environments, this really works. She brings scientific research into everyday conversations through her work, making complex psychological concepts accessible and actionable. This is the goal of a book, and what differentiates it from being like a good book to a great book. She takes a concept that a lot of people might struggle with and makes it very, very easy to digest and understand. In essence, this book makes sense. When you read her book, validation will make sense. Her ability to blend empathy and evidence-based strategies makes her a powerful voice in self-help and leadership. So what I want to do here is I want to just go through some of the takeaways and just kind of free flow and let you know what I think about them. But I want to put them into place with where you're probably at in life. I mean, we all have our different experiences, but we're all humans alive at the same time. So there's a good chance that we have a lot of, cross-pollination and interplay of similarities in the way that we look at things. I mean, if you look at some of the biggest debatable, differences in our core beliefs and things like that, it's going to be like religion and politics. It's like, so we can break people into 2 or 3 groups, but there's certain things about all of us, like validation, the need to be validated, that are similar. So I think these takeaways are going to help everybody. So the first takeaway that I took from this book, and I go into it extensively in the podcast episode, which has already been recorded. That'll come out in a couple of days. Validation is not an agreement. It's an acknowledgement. This is so important when you're looking to validate somebody. It has nothing to do, like I said before, with agreeing with them. And that's important for you to know, right? It'll help you feel free to validate someone. It's just about acknowledging them. And there's another correlation between the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Sympathy would be me feeling what you're feeling rather than just understanding. And there's a really important part of a conversation where somebody feels validated, and it's not just a result of you being a good listener. Some people just don't talk, they listen, and that's much better than talking too much, but it doesn't make the person feel validated. I mean, think about it. If you're talking like I am right now, if I don't get any feedback, I might say to myself, okay, so they're listening, but do they understand? Does it make sense what I'm saying? I don't feel validated until I get feedback. So just understand the importance of active listening. Active listening is this process of saying something to clarify what somebody said and indicate and prove that you were listening, but you also get them. And for the podcast, the audio sound, I have to say that I'm pointing at my head when I say get them, because sometimes we think get them. So I drew the analogy of forgiveness, but what's really important is it's not an agreement, it's an acknowledgement. It's just this idea of saying, I hear you. In relationships, especially with my wife or my daughter, whenever they say something, I notice because I run it through the interface response system and I allow myself to step into this space where I pause my knee jerk reflex and just think about what I'm hearing. But this is a new tool now. I'm also able to ask questions and say, am I validating them right now, or am I just waiting to talk? Right? That's an important thing. But when I hear somebody say something, my knee jerk reflex, which I have to pause, wants to give their opinion on it, wants to try to fix it. If somebody I love has a problem and they're just trying to explain it to me, so I acknowledge it and I understand, I have this tendency of wanting to fix it. You understand? So there's an example of a way to invalidate somebody by trying to help them rather than just acknowledge them. So, one of the greatest things that I ever learned, and I'm still in practice with this, is when my wife says something, I have to pause my desire to help her and fix it and just say, man, you know what? I can just imagine what that feels like. I hear you. That's it. That's it. And what's interesting is when you validate someone, they actually end up working it out for themselves. They don't need your help. And what's another interesting thing about that is, how if somebody needs your help? They'll ask you for it, right? That's another funny thing about validation is if somebody's just telling you something and they didn't say, give me your opinion or I need your help, why would you do that, right? So it's just your internal automatic response to help. So here's the second one. Invalidation triggers survival brain. So just think about what it feels like to feel invalidated, right? Like I just imagine, a scenario where I'm talking and I feel like the person didn't even make an effort to understand, or they gave an obvious sign that they were just waiting for me to shut up so that they could speak. They might even take it a step further and use what I said to get what they want. But either way, that moment where I feel invalidated, it's funny, as I even said that, I crossed my arms. When I cross my arms, it's a sign that I'm protecting myself. So I'm in survival mode. So this is another thing to consider. And if you're some sort of a manipulator and you're looking to actively try to uncross somebody's arms for your own personal gain, just understand that if you're not validating someone and making them feel heard and understood, right, in an empathetic way, you're not uncrossing their arms. Think about how you uncross somebody's arms. You have a conversation with them about their favorite topic and most important topic, them. When somebody is talking about themselves, they have a tendency of uncrossing their arms and speaking from the heart. And if you go a step further and you allow them to feel understood and heard, I mean, that's the greatest thing. Think about how wonderful. So invalidation triggers survival brain. So here's another one. Self-validation. So it's not just this idea of the interplay of a conversation between you and another. We're also talking about the interplay of a conversation between you and you. What do I mean by that? I always like to reference one of my first mentor's books. His name's Dr. Larry Markson, and he wrote a book called Talking to Yourself is Not Crazy. And it's about affirmations and things like that. And there's a lot of debate about affirmations. And I think one of the reasons that some people think affirmations are phooey is the fact that, this idea and the law of attraction, this idea of like artificially saying something that you don't mean with the intention of getting something from it. It's inauthentic, right? So I can understand why people don't do it, but what Fleck lets us know is that it sets the foundation. How you talk to yourself and whether or not you have the ability to validate yourself is huge. So this is an interesting part of it, and it's as she said, it's the foundation for resilience, right? It's not just believing in yourself. It's this ability to have a thought and process it and understand it. You're almost validating yourself. It's not about faking it and telling yourself that you are something or someone that you're not. So I love the idea of, acknowledging that how we speak to ourselves sets the tone for handling things like stress, failure, feedback, practicing internal validation is a very, very different way of looking at something that you might think is self-belief. Practicing internal validation builds emotional strength. So, what is your internal validation situation right now? When you have an idea or a thought, do you shut it down or do you allow it to be heard? Remember, you don't have to agree with your thoughts. So this is a fun game too that lends into the interface response system. Is the first step of the interface response system, and in the podcast episode I go into this, is just acknowledging the way that your brain works and the fact that your conditioned mind for the most part is running things. So once you become aware, armed with awareness that a lot of the things that you think you see and things that you want to say, your response system, are faulty and potentially invalid, you start playing this game where you don't trust yourself anymore, and you don't listen to your thoughts. I'm not saying that. When I have like a thought, even if it's a thought of fear or something like that, I allow myself to have that thought. I don't try to erase it, right? I validate the thought, but then I run it through what I call my sorting filter that has a lot of questions. And then I realize that it was nonsense. It means nothing. It doesn't matter. It's out of my control or something, but I acknowledge it. I acknowledge it. Self-validation. And then she says, validation is a bridge between conflict and compassion. This is super cool. So in arguments, people don't need solutions first. They need to know that you get it. Oh man, this is back to that, idea of improving your relationship with your spouse or your children. When somebody is in some sort of an argument, now there's two people involved, and if one person is conscious and the other is unconscious, you can't have expectations that somebody else is supposed to understand the rules of engagement. You're responsible for yourself. So in some sort of a conversation, whether it's a high stakes negotiation or it's some sort of an argument, right? High stakes argument with your spouse, just think about it. What if you just refrained from giving your opinion, refrained from trying to fix it or cover it up with something else? I have a tendency of doing that. If my wife says something, rather than just understanding and making her feel heard, I'll try to fix it and say, well, maybe this happened, maybe that happened. All she wants to do is feel heard, right? So I love that idea. And Fleck goes into that in this book. And it's just a fun thing to arm yourself with awareness about, is that interplay where if you're in a fight, you probably automatically assume that your role in it is to have adverse reactions and stand for yourself and justify your position. But that never goes well, right? And I'm not asking you to be a doormat, but try sometime in a high stakes environment like that to just not agree, but understand. You can give your opinion after, but you don't have to downplay and invalidate the thing that they said, because that's just going to make tempers rise. Anyway, love that. She goes into the 3 levels of validation. Once again, in the podcast, it's going to be more extensive. So the first one is just this idea of being present and practicing active listening, right? It's just so key to show somebody at that first level. This is the first step towards giving somebody the sense that you're validating, right? Just being present and practicing active listening, which is you hearing something and asking a question about it. I just love that. And then level 2 is naming the emotional experience. So the key is communicating with other people why it makes sense, right? Here's why it makes sense that they're experiencing. That's what I want to know, right? I want to know that you understand. So if you were to say something to me in an interaction that would indicate that you understand, or even on some level, understand what it might be like for me, it just feels great. It feels great. And it would also probably prompt me to want to do the same for you, right? And then normalizing and affirming the logic of the emotion. Think about what that means. We have this tendency to try to smooth things over. But if I express an emotion and I make a statement, even if your mind is telling you this is nonsense, it's a waste of your time, you put that on pause. That's what the interface response system's for. And you say something that normalizes and exposes the logic of the emotion. You could say something like, well, I think a lot of people probably feel that way as well, right? And what are we doing this for? Because a lot of people would hear this information or read this book and think it's a sign of weakness. And that's just because you're wired for conflict and adversity. Stick up for yourself. I know a lot of people that think that the name of the game is to hold your position and stick up for yourself. How's that working out? Right? How's that working out? So if you run the idea of validation through the interface response system, it's really cool because it's a 4-step process. And once again, in the podcast, I go into this in extent. We're almost done. And that's the idea of acknowledging the first level is perceive, and that's just to become aware of all of this stuff, aware of your need to feel validated, but aware of the fact that somebody that's talking just wants to feel validated, and aware of the conditioned mind that gets us in trouble. So once you're armed with that awareness, it gives you the ability and validates the idea of pausing after you hear something. Let them talk more maybe, but also pausing and putting your knee-jerk automatic response on hold. That's the idea of phase 2. And once you step into this space where you've put your automatic response on hold and you're listening more, that's where the magic happens. That's what Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning, said. He says the magic happens between the stimulus, the person speaking, and your response. So in that space, which would require that you pause your response, that's where the magic happens. So in the interface response system, the active listening is happening in step 3. After I've paused, I'm processing and I'm finding out more information. I'm running it through a questionnaire and filter to see what I think about it internally, but also to make sure that I understand it. We make a lot of decisions, rash decisions, without even knowing what's going on. Find out what's going on, let them feel validated, and then in the process, find out if it means anything to you. And that's how you'll create in step 4 better responses. So just some final thoughts on this as we close out. And by the way, so much more fun to just fling from the hip. I'd love to get some feedback if anybody watches this. First of all, great book. Make sure you read it. Don't take these highlights and say you've read it. That's why I want to have her on the show. She's amazing, and she's done just some great work. And the chicken does a lot of the work that she does, so it hits home. But just a couple of final thoughts. We walk through life with stories that we didn't write. Right? Programs that have been passed down to us, and conditioned responses and inherent wounds that we carry around. And what most of us are starving for, truly, right, is not advice. If I want your advice, I'll ask for it. I'm not looking for you to fix or correct me or prove that you're right and I'm wrong, or even prove that I'm right. and you're wrong. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for a moment of real human contact. That's what validation is, in my impression. It's a moment of real human to human contact. And it's a sense that someone is with you in your experience. That's what feeling validated means, that you feel like somebody is with you. And a women's search for meaning in life. I mean, that's the biggest question, is why am I here? This is why we have identity crises and things like that. If you let somebody feel understood and heard, it is like one of the greatest gifts you could ever give somebody. And ironically, is how you get everything that you want. It's okay to want. It's okay for you to want to make more money, have better relationships, feel better about yourself. It's just something that you seek second to hearing, seeking to understand rather than be understood, right? All of the things that you're looking for selfishly yourself, which are perfectly fine. People don't think, say, or do anything without having some sort of internal self-value. Process that. Just make it second. So validation isn't about who's right? It's about who's real. And when we learn to validate not just to others, but ourselves as well, we reclaim our power to respond consciously. We reclaim our power to respond consciously rather than unconsciously react, which is how everything runs amok. So if you learned something today, give it away. That's how it's going to stay. I had a ball doing this today, and there's another really real rhyme. Wish me luck. We're going to sign with somebody probably this week on the Make Sense book. 8 years, my life's work, and everything that I do. And check out the Make Sense Academy, and risk-free. You can check it out risk-free, and check out our community and everything that we're doing if you're ready to do some work. So have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time. And check out the podcast episode in the next week. Bye-bye now.